combination of. All right, so I could close it and restart it.
Okay.
But it looks like, well, okay, why are we having issues? Okay, why are we having issues? All right, looks like we're solid now. Oh, seeing more drop up. Drop frames are going up. There's the one a while back. So I guess put a pin in it and re-ask that question wherever we're at. Let's see.
Now.
Yep. Okay. The internet gremlins are hard at work at this point in time. I don't know why. But unfortunately, sometimes we don't have. I'm seeing a huge spike in issues right now. Let's see. Okay, sorry everybody.
Thank you for your patience. We appreciate you joining us.
I'm going to turn that talkie thing off. I'm seeing a huge spike in issues right now. But there we go. Okay, sorry everybody.
Thank you for your patience. We appreciate.
Okay, we seem to be going good. Okay.
Okay.
All right, now we're back at it. Hooray!
Okay. I just want to say thank you for everybody's patience and working with us through internet issues. Technology is great when it works, and sometimes when you have those issues, it gets really frustrating. So
yes,
we appreciate everybody coming back on. We do have a question in the chat from Debbie Young. What animal was the most difficult to work with that you also enjoyed working with?
Okay, the most difficult to work with. I think, honestly, actually, one that was the most difficult was a snake. We had a bull snake that I worked with at the zoo that was very difficult to handle, very difficult to get. I got it to a point where it still wasn't happy about going out on programs, but I got it to a point where it was functional and we could work with each other and just kind of move around and then put it into this and then bring it back and it would be fine. That one was probably the one. That one was probably my most. There's also a couple others. I tended to pick the ones that had the most difficulty, like the ones that nobody else ever worked with. There's a kangaroo I remember named Bojangles. He was about 250 pounds and about 6'10", I think. He was one of our biggest Western gray kangaroos at the facility, and he hated everybody. And Western gray kangaroos, they growl like dogs. So they're like, which if you've ever seen a big male kangaroo, they just look ripped. And look on the internet, look up buff kangaroo, and honestly, that's how they all look because they basically walk by doing push-ups. But he was fun, awesome. And I got him to interact with me and be able to take medications from me at that facility. So that one made me very happy. I was the only one who could get within like 4 or 5 feet without him either running off or growling or something along those lines. Those would probably be it. As far as difficult, one of my favorites at the zoo was a barn owl named Bowie that I always enjoyed working with.
Awesome. Thanks for the question. Mm-hmm. I have somebody else. When I worked at the zoo, kangaroos were really aggressive. Did they attack you ever?
Yes. And okay, so I don't like. This is an animal. Okay, now I'm going to put my animal behaviorist hat on. Animal behavior analysis. We don't like to use. We try not when we're talking about animals and behaviors. We try not to. We do a thing called delabeling. And that's basically, so we don't like using words like aggressive. We actually try to avoid adjectives when we're describing a behavior and use only verbs. So we call it verbifying as well. So it's not so much is the animal being aggressive. It's more like the animal is he making vocalizing? Is he snapping, punching, kicking? Yes, kangaroos can be aggressive by the old definition, but there's always something happening before that behavior occurs. So when you change what you do, it's not as big of a deal. The issues I usually ran into were when an animal was medicated, because it was always in a scared state because it gets separated from its mob. We'd have to put it in an isolation thing so that we can get reliable medications in there. Yes, I have been injured by kangaroos a number of times. I actually have a few scars here and there. But I wouldn't say that they're super aggressive. But they can't. The thing is, they are powerful animals. They don't like eviscerate you like some people think. But if they kick you, you will know, and you will go flying. Though I can think of one situation where there was one hand-raised kangaroo, which hand-raised male kangaroos aren't advised because then they look at humans as a either potential mate or a potential threat. So we had one male that was hand raised by the owners of the facility that would continually he would on a very regular occasion do these posturing maneuvers. And one time he did corner me, but I also knew how to deflect them. In fact, actually, I was considered one of the better animal handlers at that facility because I just knew how to roll with them. I actually used to be able to catch kangaroos out of the air as they went jumping by me, because they do this weird escape maneuver, but that's very predictable. So if you just kind of like grab their tail while they go by you, you could tuck them and put them into a sitting position, and then they're confused for a second. The big males, though, I would do is I had a technique where I would take my hand and fling it up here, and then that would always draw their attention, and then I would go down and grab their tail, which is kind of like a rudder, and then basically I'd lift their tail up, and then that would force them into a all four on the ground kind of position. And then I would guide them, because then once you have their tail, they don't want to mess with you anymore. They're like, why he's got my tail. So then I would guide them where I want in a safe manner. In that respect, most of the kangaroos though that we worked with, we tried to create a bond with, or we'd rather do a luring technique or things like that, and that actually reduced aggression. Another thing that you'd have to avoid is if he's been breeding a female, you don't want to get between him and that female. So that'd be the main thing. And aside from that, you'd have cute little joeys that thought that they were, because they'd be in the play mode where it's not real boxing. It's just like, hey, let's time to wrestle around, and they come at you periodically. But they can be dangerous. But I've worked also with a little bit with much scarier animals than kangaroos. So jaguars, those scare me.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a rather large cat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You probably don't see a whole lot of those right now.
No, not anymore. Not anymore. It's
yeah.
much safer. I think that's funny, because sometimes I get with these aggressive clients and they're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, seen worse. My heart doesn't go up on that level anymore for this stuff.
Yeah. So I do want to back up for a minute, because I want to make sure that people that are listening or that'll see this later, I'm not sure what point we froze before online. Mm-hmm. And so could you go ahead and walk through again, if somebody contacts you,
okay,
have you come and work with their animal with it, with an issue that they have, what does that process look like?
So with that process, basically they call me, I'll ask a lot of questions. First, I just want to hear what is wrong. What does that person or that family, what issues are they having? Because some people don't like the dogs on the furniture. Fine. That might be an issue for one family. Another family might just be having issues because the dog is growling. But some others are okay with growling, but they don't like snapping kind of a line. So I want to make sure that I know what the client expects. So, and also what they're actually having issues with. And that initial consult or initial talk before we even get to the consult will oftentimes be very emotional, particularly with my aggression cases or reactive cases where people are at their wits' end and they can't handle it. They're having it's an emotional situation, and I understand because I've gone through that on my end as well. So we talk through that and also let them know that there is hope. we can work through this. And then from there we go on to uh, working on a consultation, like what when when can we start kind of idea. I do for the face to face. I do have like a scale, or I sell it in packages, but I let people upgrade as we go. So they don't. A lot of people want me to just say, how many sessions is it going to take? Well, we're working with a brain, and we're working with a lot of different people working with this animal, so it's super hard to predict
Sure.
XYZ. So usually I do a kind of a package scale, and the more they do, the cheaper it will get. But I usually have people start with 1 or 3 session packages, see if they like my methodology, see if it's working for them, and then we just, if we have to keep going, we keep going. Usually with the aggression, it's like 6 or 10. I always warn people it's going to be 6, 10, or even more. But the more sessions we also do together, the cheaper it gets per session. So kind of a reward for sticking to it kind of idea. And then from there, then we go through a whole big spiel. The first session is a partial, a beginning of a very introductory psychology behavior talk, and then moving on to what we're going to do with your animal. Usually the only real reason I keep the psychology kind of bit in there is to start planting those seeds in the family's head, like, oh, that I'm now seeing this because it was happening there before, but we didn't think of it as important, and now it is. I should tell the trainer the next time we talk. So we try to get those going.
Right. So where do you generally work with people at?
90% of the time it is in their home. Obviously with the coronavirus, we're not doing that. So we're doing online consultations, which everybody has a phone and pretty good internet access generally. So it works out really well, or even their laptops work fine. So I go into the home, and one thing that I like about that is I can actually see the environment the dog's in. A lot of times people will go to the group classes, but that changes the environment for the animal, so the animal doesn't learn to do it at home, or even the people don't learn how they have to incorporate it at home. Like maybe they have to tweak it a little bit, but they don't understand how. They don't have the skill sets to tweak that behavior in their home environment versus the classroom environment. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So
yeah, absolutely.
I like doing that. I did actually, I forgot that part of my story about what I did. So around 2010, I actually did start doing group classes for the Garden City Recreation Department and also Garden City Veterinary Clinic. And I was doing group classes, and I felt rushed, and every learner goes at a different pace. So I felt like it wasn't quite as successful as it could be if I could focus on 1 or 2. And I've seen some classes where they have a ton of people. Really, even if I do a group class, I only want 4 or 5 people so I can focus on their needs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So is it more difficult now, like in the age of COVID? I know doing some of the online consultations, how much more difficult is that for you to do what you really need to be able to do to work with the families?
Doing the online consultations, honestly, they're not that different. They're not that bad. And if anything, I don't notice much difference in success rate. There are some times where yes, it could be helpful for me to be physically there. But what I do anyway is train the people to train the animals. So, because I can do a bunch of work, but if it's not being done on a daily basis, then it's not going to stick as well at home anyway. So basically all I do is I cut out the phase where I'm actually working with the animal. So sometimes that can speed it up a little bit because I know how to quickly adjust my training plan. Like, oh, the animal did this. You know what? I'm going to stop doing this type of and switch to a different technique. And I can do that on the fly, whereas somebody who is just learning can't. So in that respect, it takes a little bit longer because I'll be stopping them and going, okay, stop, come back, we're going to do it this way. We're changing what you're doing. We're doing it XYZ now. But in the end, it's still just them working with the animal that they need to be working with, and they're learning the techniques that they need to do. So I haven't noticed much of a difference. I've had some animals that, well, actually, the cockatoo is a great example. It doesn't see people that often, so it just shut down whenever I was around. It was just like, what is that guy here for? Didn't like me. So what we did was we trained the people to do the training. Then once I left, it was much braver and willing to do the training, and they recorded it. And I sometimes have my online consultations record what they're doing, send it to me, and then I send a rebuttal. Usually it's me talking over the video that they sent me. Like, okay, you did excellent here. Now let's do this. And here, I like this. Maybe a little faster here. Change this or that. So we can change as we go, because I mean, modern technology has changed how modern training is done, because we can actually look to see how the behavior is going when the trainer isn't there. Because me being in the room changes that animal's behavior in and of itself just because I am there. Whether it's because I'm a new person or because, oh, it's Trainer Man. I like Trainer Man. I always make the joke like, oh, I'm a perfect angel, Trainer Man. I don't know why they hired you, because the dog will be splendid with me in the room. But then once I leave, that's when all the behaviors things come up. So sometimes it's good to get those recordings like, oh, and then I can go, aha, how about you? Sometimes I've been in some situations where I can like look around the area and I'll spot, hey, how about we just move that furniture? And it drastically changes the animal's perspective of the situation, because maybe we got rid of a bottleneck that was causing tension, and the animal just hated that spot and was always frustrated with it. So just adding like 6 inches of space in that walkway, boom, you've got a whole new dog. Not all behaviors very few behaviors are easily that fixed, but that could be a major factor in all the behaviors. It's just slight changes to the environment.
Feng Shui for animals.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you ever ran into a situation where you just couldn't do anything with the animal?
No, I have not. There's always been something that we can do. There have been some very difficult cases. There was a cat aggression case that was very tough. That cat also had issues, only it wasn't that the cat shut down. The cat, and it was too amped up because I was the stranger. So we had to do the training once again when I wasn't there. But we still came up with alternative behaviors and alternative plans to reduce any risk to anybody involved, and also start slowly adjusting the issues that cat was having. I always say, though, I am not, like I said before, there's no magic wand that will fix anything. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of work. So there are cases where I say that, like with aggression, we will fix it. I don't like the word fix. We will manage it and we will make it better. But once it's there, it's just like, as I said, like anxiety or depression, you're going to have good times and you're going to have bad times. And sometimes, but the thing is, now that you know what, I'm going to teach you what to look for, so you can start predicting when those bad times are coming. And you can start making, maybe you get to a point where you don't have to have all like plan A, B, C, D in place to keep training and managing. Maybe you're just like, okay, now we're back down, we're just doing A, but then you start seeing a few little behavior cues that I've warned them about. And then they go into that and they go, oh, okay, he warned us about this. Now we have to implement B, C, and D until we get them back into a better state. Just like somebody who has a mental disorder, if say depression is going up, you'll see signs and behavior changes that are leading to that, to maybe an outburst later on. But if you know what to do, you can actually predict that, and makes it much, much more livable.
That makes sense. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. If you have questions or comments, please type them in the chat box and we'll be happy to answer them. Or Whitney will be happy to answer them, by the way. He is the expert on this. So please feel free to make any comments or questions that you have. We still have some time for those. So
Yes, and
One,
sorry for the jumping from one spot to the other. The internet gremlins have once again showed their heads.
yeah, absolutely. Debbie Young says it's very interesting, and I agree with you. I love animals, and my daughter particularly loves animals, and has kind of been looking at that field to go into, possibly working with animals. She's just trying to figure out where to go, but she's looking at apex predators, which I think would be
That'd be lions and tigers and
interesting
wolves
piece.
and things like that.
Yeah, lions and tigers and bears. Oh my.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, Whitney. This is really cool. And I don't know your name, but it's 5J/PHLQ. I'm not going to
As I say, that's Ashton. I actually have his company working, or I shouldn't say have them. I will be as soon as I sign the thing and send it back to him. Working on a fancy new logo from his company. Which,
awesome.
What was the name of your company again?
Master Plan Communications.
Master Plan Communications. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah, MPC.
I'm not going to say what exactly it is, but be ready for. I'm going to have an unveiling eventually once it's done.
It'll be cool. No, I love Whitney's stories. I didn't know I could talk or I was on mic, but I love Whitney's stories.
Sure.
Like, at a party or two, like he told me some other stories about my interest in animals, and I was like, "This is going to be interesting." So, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think you could have anything to deal with animals that wouldn't be interesting, especially given the vast variety and the experiences that you've had. Just to be able to see and hear some of those things that are just kind of an interesting piece. Plus, when you do extensive research on things anyway, and so I know you always have interesting tidbits to add in.
Oh yeah, my wife and I are big research nerds, so we tend to go down the research hole. Like once something piques our interest, we're just like, okay, how many papers are there on this? Let's go look at. Actually, when I was starting this business, you have to do the whole biography and kind of let everybody know that does know you how much experience you have. And I was looking through it, I was like, okay, so I've been training dogs since, and then I looked at the timeline. I was like, oh, I'm measuring in decades now. That I've been working with all these exotics and everything else.
Yeah. So if you could pick any animal to work with that you haven't worked with so far, what would you like to work with?
Oh, that I haven't worked with, that I would like to work with. Oh, that is a good. Actually, there's always one that I go to. That's bats. Bats have always been a favorite of mine, and I never actually got to physically work with them. In college, almost every paper I wrote had to do with bat, whether it was evolution or a behavior science paper. It always came down to bats. I'd always go back to them. I just find them super interesting as the only flying mammal, and there's just such a variety. They're like the second most diverse group of mammals because they can fly and they are just kind of everywhere. And you got the cute flying foxes, and you got the weird ones that do like echolocation, which is a fantastic little unique among terrestrial and flying animals and all the things involved with that. So that one would be one that I'd like to do at some point in time. But
yeah, that would be interesting. I don't really know a lot about bats or how they do things. I know about the only thing I really know is they're mainly nocturnal animals.
Meet with me at the brewery sometime and ask me about them, and you'll a few hours later we'll be done.
Deal. I'll take you up on that.
There you go. Do we have anybody that has any questions that are online or looking out? Please put them in the chat box and we can get those answered for you.
Yeah.
Give some people a second to think about those things. So if there was something about your business that you want people to know that you just really want to reinforce, what would it be?
Oh, let's see. Right now, just because of the Corona situation, is that my doors are open. Yes, I'm not going to be coming to your house, but we can work and get you through the issues that you have. and there's a lot of the other thing would be that I am a what would be called a positive reinforcement trainer, but I'm also what's known as a crossover trainer, which means my early education in the process was the more traditional methods that you would utilize, choke change, shot collars, and things of that nature. But I have transferred over to this method, and the reason I have is because the effects are better, they're more long term, and you end up with a much better relationship with your animal afterwards. Hands down, every time I've from my experiences. So if you want to have a good relationship with your animals, and also the other thing, bestial means that I work with all sorts of animals. If you are having issues with your cat, if you're having issues with your birds, that's what I'm here for. I don't just do dogs. I do dogs mostly, but I work with pretty much any species out there.
Is there any animals are there any kind of animals that you don't like to work with?
Honestly, no. Well, no. Spiders. I never was a fan of spiders. In the zoo, I got to the point where I would love the tarantulas to crawl on me, but I do not care for tarantulas. But even them, I could work with. Usually with those, it would be me advising for the environment that animal has that might be causing certain issues.
Yeah, Micah says she has a new cat for you to train because.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Simba is sowing his oats in the house and taking over everything.
Yes, that would be. It's a male cat, I'm assuming, because that I think that's partially I don't like to put labels, as I said, but sometimes they creep into even my vernacular.
Yeah. I find it interesting that you don't like the spiders too well, but you're more than willing to work with the snakes.
Oh, the snakes are fantastic. They're cuddly wuddlies. Actually, it had an interesting epiphany when I was in the zoo world. It took a bunch of volunteers to Albuquerque Zoo, which has the hottest collection of reptiles. They have more dangerously venomous reptiles there than any other place. And they're a rattlesnake rescue. So when people capture rattlesnakes and they don't want them someplace, they send them there, and then they send them to better environments for them. So walking through, you walked into this one room, 150 rattlesnakes just go off at the same time. That was intimidating. Looked in a bucket going, well, what's in there? And a black mamba jumps up at my face. I'm like, oh, okay. But meeting the individual that ran that department, he was he had no fear. And in fact, he'd actually been, although I think he needed to have a little bit more fear because he'd been hospitalized 6-7 times and went comatose twice due to snake bites. But the real thing that I took out of that was like, if this guy can be this brave with these actually dangerous snakes, I can be brave with a bull snake that can't hurt me in any way, shape, or form. And then that was actually that turning point that I had with that bull snake that I mentioned earlier, was me just going, you know what? What's the worst that is going to happen? He's going to bite me, and maybe I'll bleed a little, but their teeth are so tiny, they can't really pierce that much. It's not that big a deal. And then once I got over my fear, I was less flinchy and less, and I still like snakes at the time. A snake's lunging at you, there's an instinct that we have. And in fact, there's actually a part of our brain that scientists have found that react to the silhouette of a snake or certain other things that people tend to have phobias of. And it's actually a hardwire spot in our brain, it turns out. But once you get over that and you get over that flinchiness, you can actually work quite a bit. That is one area. Deal with the snakes. I'm listening to or reading some comments that are funny in the chat there.
Comments.
Yeah.
The snakes are better than spiders. Nope.
Yep. And then
you can come deal with my spiders. I'll call Whitney to deal with your snakes. Win-win situation.
There you go. Exactly.
I think that's a good call. I don't mind spiders, but snakes.
Yeah. Which that whole flinching situation, that actually is a major factor when you're animal handling. Is you have to have a lot of self-control. I had one puppy that I remember a client was it was a fairly aggressive little puppy that it was getting some food guarding issues that we were working through, and a number of times. But basically, one thing is like you don't flinch, no matter what happens. That actually makes the situation worse. So, as an animal handler, animal trainer, you kind of have to get rid of that. I remember once with that client that I was thinking of, I did get bit that day, and I don't know, I get bit like you'd think I'd get bit more often, but it's like once in a 2 year period maybe, and it's not that bad. But and every time I can always pinpoint where I screwed up. Not the animal's fault. It was me screwing up. Like, oh, you know what I did? And that one was I looked away at the wrong time and was uh, the pup was seeing me as an antagonist in the situation. But even then, I still just didn't move. I let the pup just do their thing, and then once we were done, I didn't punish the pup for it because, as I said, it's my situation. But you have to have that self control. Was I upset and angry when I have some teeth latched onto me? Yes, but you have to control that. I had it one time in the middle of an arena. I had a parrot that it was just done. It was like I am done, and I could see it, and I'm walking by the audience with it, and it just looked at me, and I'm like, "You're gonna bite me, aren't you? You're gonna bite me right now." As soon as I got around, so I started speeding around the corner so that the audience didn't see, but he nailed and pierced my thumbnail all the way through. But I just contained myself, and we worked on him, getting him off, and then once he was off, we were fine. We got him back into a calmer state. But you have to have that little bit. You have to have that chunk of self control. So in some situations like that, I do think it is better that I am there if we're dealing with a case of that level. Just because that for me is more of a safety issue than a training issue. It's just I know better what to look for than the client does. So in those situations, I guess, in those extreme aggression cases, vast majority of cases though that come to me for aggression, on a scale of 10, I call it a 3 because they haven't seen my 9s and 10s. But most people, and hopefully they never do. Hopefully nobody ever sees above a 5. But if you've never seen above a 3, then that 3 is terrifying and horrible. And I completely understand that from their perspective.
Yeah, but when you have somebody come in and say, okay, this isn't as bad as what you've seen in the past, this isn't as bad as nearly as bad as it could be. Yeah, you don't want them doing this, but it's not the most terrible thing that they could be doing. It's got to be a little bit of comfort to the family too, knowing that, okay, this isn't, something that we can't deal with and move forward.
Exactly. And when I'm talking with them, we do this balance. I'm doing a balance of not belittling what they're going through, but at the same time, we are acknowledging that there's levels above that. And then usually, once we work that process through, everyone tends to be much, much happier because I'm taking them seriously. I'm taking them seriously, and they now know this isn't as bad as I'm thinking. Or not necessarily so much it's not as bad, but it has a much higher chance of being fixed because it is so much lower down on the spectrum than they had previously thought.
Yeah, because I know that frustration level can get really high.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, now that you're looking at, you've been doing the some online consultations, and I know that you and I have talked previously that you're kind of looking at phases of opening up along with kind of to go along with the economy and what the governor has scheduled for the state of Kansas. So what does that look like for you?
Okay, so for me, as we talked about, I'm a very person. Before it got to this level, I was doing a survey, and I did have a couple of clients that they were not as honest as they were, as I would have liked about the questionnaire, which was just a simple thing like, have you traveled and stuff like that. So because of that, I am going to err on the side of caution with opening up. I probably won't be going to homes until phase 3. Whenever our community hits that point. And also I'm also looking at what the professionals are saying, not politics, I guess, that are hovering over this. So I'll be looking at our health departments and things like that, and our hospitals. What are they saying? What do they say our risks are? Once I'm convinced that I cannot be put at fault for spreading to other households, then I'll open up the doors. But probably phase 3.
Okay, that sounds good. So where can people find you if they want to have questions for you, if they want to contact you about working with their animal? Where do they find you?
They can find me at bbbehaviors.com. I got the website there. I'm also on BB Behaviors is also on Twitter and also on Facebook. Facebook, I think, is hands down the most traffic we receive. We're also on Instagram. But just look up Buchman Bestial Behaviors or BB Behaviors.
Okay, that sounds great. Whitney, I want to thank you so much for being with us this evening and for working with us and working through the technical difficulties and handling. I will say that Whitney's been handling the technical side of things and the streaming side of things this evening too. So working with the internet and helping monitor all of the drives and streams that are going on for this evening. I really appreciate you doing that. Thank you to everybody that has joined in with us this evening. If you have any suggestions, any questions, anything for Whitney, please feel free to message him. He does a great job with the animals, and he is extremely passionate and devoted to doing his and to working with the animals that he's working with. And we do have another question in the chat box before we log off for this evening. Any suggestions for dogs that bark at everyone that walks by? Yes. We don't exactly want our dogs to invite every stranger into our yard, but we don't want them barking at everyone either. How do we balance the two?
Okay, yes. So this is one I get often because this is probably one that gets it's just a very common issue. So you're talking about walking by as in the dog is out in your yard. You're not on a walk with your dog because those are going to be it's going to be a similar process, but it's going to be handled differently from those two ways. So one thing I tell people, a lot of people don't like it because it means a little bit more work on their end. But if the dog starts barking, they have to come inside. One problem that a lot of people have is they'll let their dogs out, or they'll go to work and leave their dogs out the whole day. The problem is when the dog is unsupervised, they are learning something. They are learning whatever it is they are getting reinforcement or rewards for. And when they bark at something, they get an endorphin rush. So it's going to help perpetuate that behavior. And the more they do it, the more it's going to kind of snowball into just barking at everything. So if they start barking, bring them inside if you're not going to monitor them outside. If they do, then basically I have a process where we create a mark and reward every time they ignore something that goes by. But you're going to have to be out in the yard with them for a while, at least until that behavior becomes much stronger to ignore the other thing out there. Because the problem is we have what's called competing reinforcers. The reinforcement of barking at the whatever it is, because that's exciting and they're getting some endorphin rush out of it, to whatever you're trying to teach them to do. So we're going to have to, if there's nothing there, then all they're going to get reinforced for is barking, barking, barking. But if you go out and at least monitor them for a while, and then when they're done, bring them inside, you can use rewards on this end to stop this behavior, if that makes sense. We replace the old behavior of barking with a new behavior. For example, how about you go explore the opposite side of the yard instead of there? But we have to give them a reason to do it. If there's no reason to do it, they'll just go right back to the thing that they're already after.
Is it better to do it with one at a time, or can you do it with the 2 or 3 or how many ever dogs that you have?
It depends on how bad the situation is and how worked up they are. Oftentimes with that situation, I would do one at a time at first and then bring in the multiples, because the other side of that is dogs like to do things in packs. When the pack works together, that's another thing that gets an endorphin rush. So if there are multiple dogs barking at a thing, they like it even more. Now, another thing to avoid on that note is you going, no, 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 stop barking, because now it sounds like you're doing what?
Barking at them.
Barking, and you've joined in the pack. So actually, what you're doing is giving them an endorphin rush and the okay and the reward to do it more. So you need to. So that's why we need to come up with just a whole alternative thing to do instead.
Okay. We have another comment in the box too that says, "But what if they bark so they can come back inside?"
Okay, if they're barking to come back inside, that's a different thing. So there's a few different factors. I'd have to see the setup that you'd have, and we'd have to get. Basically, what I would do is I'd probably replace them and give them a new behavior on a way to ask to come inside rather than barking. Because one thing that you're running into is even if you don't let the dog in, the dog at some point in time has made a correlation between I bark, I get let inside. But when they don't come inside, then we end up with what's in the behavior world, what's known as an extinction event. And what always happens with an extinction event is the behavior gets worse before it gets better. Because it worked at some point in time. So if it's worked before and it's not working now, what do I do to make it happen? Do it more. The best way to explain this for humans is an elevator button. How many people... logically, we know if we hit the elevator button, it's not going to come any faster. But maybe one time it works. So now you see people like ding, 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 ding on that elevator button because they think if they just do it more, it'll work. And that's kind of what's happening. So I would actually create a alternative way for the dog to ask to come in. They have these neat little bells you can actually, it makes a ding dong sound and they push it and it will make a sound on the inside. But you have to have an outside like outlet or something, or battery packs version kind, rather than them barking. So you just replace it. The best way to get rid of a bad habit is to replace it with a new habit, is basically what it comes down to.
Awesome. Thank you for the questions, everyone that's been chiming in. And thank you for coming with us tonight on this journey to talk to Whitney and see all of the kind of cool stuff that he does with animals. And please, if you have any questions, please reach out to him. He does have extensive expertise in this area. Whitney, I know we could talk to you all evening and talk about some of the cool experiences that you've had, but I think we're at the end of our time this evening. So thank you so much for joining us this evening and doing this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And I will, and you're welcome, Rebecca. And I'll see you guys in the future.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great Friday night.